Chief, do you want to pass out the?
You wrote to ask for budget binders back from this class? Yeah. I got one of the recycled ones.
Thank you.
I didn't even open it. Thank you. I have like just look a little more understandable.
Okay, it's 2 o'clock, and we're going to get our first meeting started here for the budget with the police department. Want to welcome the broadcasting that we're having here, and there's a few ground rules for everybody who don't know. No nose picking, no scratching, no, anything like that. So stay focused on what we're doing. Be careful when you bang the mics, and we'll move.
Sending baseball messages across.
Sign language is okay. This is also closed captioned. This will be closed captioned throughout, which is very good. And we have the police department with us here today. Chief Fowler. I want to just say on behalf of the citizens of the city of Syracuse and personally myself, I want to thank you for your 29 years of service. I know you probably wonder where did 29 years go here, but 29 years of service with the police department.
I remember every last one of them. Got the scars to prove it.
There you go. So thank you for your service. And Chief, if you could introduce the chiefs and that you brought and the people that you brought with you today, and then I'll introduce the counselors.
Yeah, certainly. Sitting at the table here, I have Sergeant Brian Lutz, who's in charge of our ABC department, and to my right is First Deputy Chief Joe Cecil, and the audience there is the entire executive staff. Deputy Chief Lynette Dalfabro, Deputy Chief Richie Schaff, and Deputy Chief Derek McGork.
Thank you. It's so many years of seeing Chief Schaff here that we remember he's a deputy chief now, not a lieutenant, not a captain. He's a deputy chief now. And I want to, we had a handout here from the police department which has a breakdown for the Field Services Bureau on calls, and we'll let the chief speak to that when we get to it. But let's start. It's on page 181, and we probably should look at from 181, look at page 186, because that really gives you the numbers for the first breakdown, which is the general service sworn personnel. And then it gives you the numbers if you're looking for the numbers here, and it gives the numbers for the sworn personnel for general services. Field services sworn personnel numbers are on 195, and those are the ones that are basically the patrol division. So, Chief, why don't you give us an overview first, or before I go any further, let me introduce my colleagues. 2nd District Councilor Chad Ryan, 1st District Councilor Joe Carney, at-large Councilor Mike Green, 5th District Councilor Joe Driscoll, President Helen Hudson, Councilor at Large Khalid Bey, Councilor at Large Tim Green, and Tim Green. Okay, Tim Green, and Tim Rudd, and Councilor, 4th District Councilor Latoya Allen. So why don't you give us an overview of the department, where they stand now, what is going on, and then we'll get right to the indicators.
Sure. To date, we have 403 police officers, and our projected loss through the month of May will probably put us down an additional 5 officers from that 403 number. we continue to answer the same amount of calls per service. We're almost on par with last year in terms of our calls for services. Outside of that, I'm not sure what
Okay,
what
okay.
we're looking for.
No, we'll go to the,
I'm anxious to get to the numbers.
okay, let's get to the numbers. Let's go to the, first of all, we're gonna do the, we're first gonna do the General Service Bureau, okay?
Sure.
Get that out of the way and then get to the larger. So the General Service Bureau, why don't you tell us what that consists of and maybe a little breakdown of the personnel. There are only 60-some people that are assigned personnel.
Yes. Our General Service Bureau is that's our administrative bureau. The folks who work inside, so to speak, our non-operations folks. That's folks in our human resource, our training, our ABC department, our IT team, and our property section, property management section.
And this is traditionally the areas that people think of the officers working inside. This totals, as I totaled it, it was about 30 officers with command also, and the chief. Is that correct about?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you look in at page 182 for the general services? And counselors, what I'm going to do is I'm just got a couple questions on this area here, and then I'm going to open it up to you for field service or general services, and then we'll go to the field services. But my question is under the armament section.
Yes.
And it indicates that there were 454 officers, or let's say 480 officers actually are proposed to be trained next year in the armament. Where are you doing your training now for armament?
Our training for our regular patrol and online personnel is done out in the city of Fulton. We have to take the officers completely out of service for that day. And as you know, Fulton is a 30-minute drive, even at cop speed. And so it's, you're losing an hour in commute time, so therefore you're going to lose an hour in training time, and so that's where we go, because there's no place around here for us to use other than that.
And each officer gets trained how often?
It all depends. Definitely once a year. Ideally, we look for twice a year, but there are some things that happen that prevent us from training twice a year. Logistics, manpower. A lot of times this has to occur during the summer months because of the weather and the fact that we're outside, and this happens to be central New York. We have to look at the warm summer months for folks to train outside, because there's a great likelihood that you'll be able to complete the training on the day that is scheduled. Then with our personnel being as low as they are, we have to look for backfill. At some point you hit a brick wall. You don't have folks to backfill for the folks that you need to backfill for, so then you have to make some adjustments, and if we have to make an adjustment in training, then that's where we make the adjustment at. We won't make the adjustment in terms of our minimum staffing. That's a priority one.
Okay, Chief, thank you. Questions, go right ahead.
Just to follow up with that, the facility in Fulton, is that, does the sheriff's department here and some of the other departments, is that primarily where everyone goes to go do their training like this, or?
I don't know where I don't know where the sheriff's department goes, but people are spread out all over the place, and that's one of the, a firearms range.
Yeah.
If we were to have that, when you look at shared services, right, a firing range is something that every law enforcement agency in Central New York needs. We go out to Fulton, we send 400 something officers out to Fulton. If we do that twice a year, it's an outdoor range, right? You can only dig a dirt berm back so far and because you have EPA issues, and I'm sure they're staying on top of those. But if we continue to train out there and fire out there, at some point we're going to outgrow that. They're only going to be able to change the dirt out so far before they're going to put themselves out of business. And so we really need a range, ideally an indoor range, so you could train 24 hours a day. There was a point in time we had a range in the basement of the public safety building, and we would the officers would qualify during the course of their workday. It would cut down on overtime, it would cut down on minimum staffing, and you would be able to train more frequently. The officers would ideally more proficient at their weapons, because at the times when you're not training, the range is open for them to come down and to train on their own. But we don't have anything like that now.
And I guess that would be sort of my question is, do you think it would be beneficial to look into something like that and possibly try and have a partnership with either the county or maybe one of the municipalities around us to look into developing, like, what would, at the end of the day, do you think we would see savings in either overtime or at least the number of officers that we could actually still have around and actually out, on a beat?
All of the above and then some.
Okay.
You would absolutely see a significant savings in overtime because, as I just stated, you won't have to take the officers offline, and therefore you won't have to backfill. That will show a significant savings. And yes, every agency around here would look forward to using that, because you would ideally run it 24 hours a day. And if you build something new, you can also build in the technology that you need for the officers to train in low light shooting and things of that nature. So it would be attractive for every law enforcement agency in Central New York and beyond to want to use this facility. And then there would be an opportunity to generate some revenue as well, because in the times, if you were to open it up to the general public, those who have firearms license that want to come out and shoot on a range, if this is a facility that's open in the city or in close proximity to the city, then that would create an option for the city to generate some revenue by having people come out to the range at certain periods of time when the officers are not using the range.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Others that may have questions in the field or the General Service Bureau?
I have a question.
Counselor Allen?
Yes, my question is for the taser certs. So how does the training work in that aspect, as far as the officers being trained to use the tasers?
So the officers are trained initially to use the tasers, and then there's a recertification that the officers have to go through each year in order for them to be able to carry and to use the tasers. That's one of our training requirements.
And it's once a year?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question, Chief. I'm looking at the sick time buyback, and it's almost doubling. So is there a reason why we're gonna double in the sick time buyback?
It's because of the retirees. Each retiree gets about 8,000. They get paid for 250 hours upon retirement if they have it in their back. So each retiree gets 8,000.
Yeah, go ahead.
The reason the sick time buyback is we're requesting a higher amount is because of the anticipated higher number of retirees. Per the PBA contract, upon retirement, an officer is paid up to 250 hours of sick time. For the average officer, depending on rank, that's anywhere between $6,000 and $8,000.
Okay, and maybe while I have you, I can ask you my next question, because I'm looking at equipment and office equipment and furnishings. It was at 50,000, and for adopted and projected, it's at 150.
Yes, ma'am. The biggest change there, the 150 came into play for fiscal year 18 for the first time because we reached the end of the life for the cops cameras throughout the city. They have an estimated life of 5 to 7 years. The west side cameras were in that time frame, and many of them needed to be replaced. We're now anticipating, because of all these projects that went into the city over the past 5, 6, 7 years, each year we're going to have that same 10 to 15 cameras at least that are going to need to be replaced.
Okay, because I'm confused. So the cameras go under office equipment?
That's just the budget line. It's an equipment line. It's the most logical place on the budget, I guess, for it. But that's what the 150 represents.
Other general service questions? Councilor Green.
So my question's about the automotive and the equipment mechanic portion. Just for me, this is my first time going through, so sorry for the ignorance. But in the other departments, obviously DPW has very similar positions. Fire department does too. I'm curious if you ever see down the line a future where there could be more collaboration between them, working on different vehicles in different departments, or what the restrictions are from not doing that.
I'm not opposed to that. I don't know of any restrictions that we have. I know that our mechanics they have become proficient in working on our police cars, and I know that they do a tremendous job of using vehicles that have been involved in crashes and taking parts out of one, putting them in the other, and putting those vehicles back online. But I'm not opposed to using shared services with DPW or anyone else if that's going to save the city money, and if we're going to still continue to have folks work on our vehicles in a reasonable amount of time.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Ryan.
So under staffing, you're going from 63 to 60 employees. There were 3 police officers, grade 21A. Did they get moved, or what's going on with that? On page 185.
Yeah, so as people retire out of certain positions, we have to prioritize the positions that we fill, and those positions that the decrease from the 17 to the 14, that's where you show police officers' positions, and we're just trying to get by.
And then the salary, the overtime wages seem pretty close from last actual to projected. How come we're just leaving at 600,000? Next page, 187. Are we, because of that, those 3 staffing positions? We think we're gonna save 40 grand?
The overtime, are you talking about overall? Or
No, just for the general services, which is just those 60 employees.
Yeah, that's as you will discover later on as we get to the overall numbers. You'll notice that our overtime request for overtime has been decreased throughout the entire budget. So this is just a reflection of the reduction in overtime for that particular section. You're probably going to see reductions throughout because our overtime request has been reduced by a couple $1 million.
Okay, and then those body cameras are gonna fall under what section?
As far as the budget, I don't think they're gonna be falling under any budgetary
Because
item,
it's
because they're gonna, it's a
grants
field
money?
test, yeah, it's a 1-year field test for completely free. Taxpayers don't pay for a dime of it, and then after that year, that's where you're gonna have to budget it. Yep, but right now it's free for 1 full year.
I'd like to do a follow-up question on the overtime. Is the overtime specific to the, because this is fields or general services, is this specific to the overtime in their department, or does this include like dome time or minimum staffing or anything else? Is that's total overtime within here?
Which number are you referring to? Because
Page 187.
The top, the second line.
Says sworn police general.
He was referencing this number here, not the.
Would that be inclusive of all overtime that an officer, if they worked in general services, were working? Would that be inclusive?
It'd be all the overtime they worked, correct?
Yep, okay. Any other questions on that before we move to field services?
Just got one.
Yep. Counselor Bay?
I was gonna ask a question, Chief, I think you already answered it. I noticed a decrease between the actuals of fiscal year 2017 and the adopted of 2018. But you talked about the decrease in overtime, and I'm assuming retirement has something to do with the decrease in the overall number as well. This is under police sworn services on page 181. Of course, I'm always satisfied with the decrease.
Just look at the thing.
I'm asking if the decrease in overtime and in retirees is the result for the overall decrease here that's shown here. Fiscal year actual 37. It's actually a decrease of about 600,000 between fiscal year 17 actual and fiscal year 18 adopted.
And you're asking what is the difference?
Well, no, I was making the assumption that what was communicated. It was the earlier question I had, but I was making the assumption that what was communicated about the decrease in overtime and, of course, retirees or people, the decrease in the force was the cause of the decrease between fiscal year actual 17 and actual 18.
Yeah, it's our hope that will help to balance the decrease in our requests from over last year. And there's a lot of other things that we have to do in terms of belt tightening that we're gonna need to do in order for us to reach that number.
My last question on that, Chief, back to, you mentioned 403 police officers. We asked this before, just for clarity. Is that active, or does that include officers who are out on compensation?
Yeah, from any period of time during the course of a week or day, however you wanna look at it, we can have anywhere from 12 to 20 officers that are out of service. And you would subtract that from this 403. And you actually could subtract the executive staff here from that 403.
So the number of active is actually less than 403 when you...
Yes.
So, not to get too far ahead, so how many unfunded positions are there technically on the books?
Do you know the answer to that, Brian?
Unfunded, and then unfilled after.
For fiscal 19, 25 would be unfunded.
Do you know what unfilled is? What the positions that are funded but not currently filled is?
This is an unfunded number.
That's for next year.
This is our actual allotted strength. So that would be 61. Right?
We did that.
So approximately 61.
Thank you.
Okay, Counselor Green.
I'm just
I mean,
catching
Rudd,
for you
Rudd,
all
I'm
day
gonna
long.
do,
Tim Green, Tim Green.
Green Rudd.
Regarding the sick leave, it was mentioned the 250
sit over
hours
there.
of payout for retirement. How many days or hours do officers get a year of sick leave? Is it?
Do you know?
It depends on, wouldn't it depend on like how long they've been there? Or does every officer get the same amount?
I think they do. Isn't it 1.5 per month or something like that, or one? It's contractual. I'm not sure. It's something per month. but I don't know.
Piedmont, Jeff?
1.5 per month.
1.5 per month.
Okay.
Do you know what average use of sick leave is compared to
35.
what they earn? Because it
They
seems
get
like the
hours,
cap is
7
pretty
hours,
low
I think.
if you're working 30 years. You don't get to roll a lot of it forward, right? If it's 250 hours.
The cap in terms of payout or the cap in terms of the amount of sick time that they receive?
The
Are two
cap in
things.
terms of payout, because if you can't roll it forward, then you're incentivized to use it, I would assume, which adds to the overtime. So in theory, if you had a higher cap, officers,
The cap
do they use kind of their sick leave that they?
The cap that you can hold, the cap that you can hold in your sick bank is about 1,016 hours, give or take a few. You can only be paid out for the first 250. You can bank more should you have a off-duty illness or something where you need to use it.
Well, and Tim, there's sick leave, there's personal days and
I know.
vacation, so they probably use their sick first.
That's not true. Yeah. No. Are you implying that they use their sick leave for vacation time before they use their
I'm
vacation
just implying people use their sick days.
when they're sick? Yes. And that's what they're there for.
I think you might explain to the rest of the counselors how if somebody's off sick for a couple of days and they get a doctor's note, how that happens, how somebody might go to their house and knock on their door and
Sure, we
they have to have
continue to monitor.
verification.
We continue to monitor the use of sick time. We have far less police officers, and the more police officers so we could get out there working. We try to we make sure that we manage that properly. And after police officers are sick beyond two days or beyond, then they have to have a doctor. They have to see a doctor or call one of our doctors, so to make sure that they are under doctor's care for that period of time, and they're not just taking off and just randomly using the days for something other than what they're intended for. So we have a management system in place to track that and to capture that to whatever degree we can.
Counselor Rudd,
Thank you. For now.
all set? Okay. We're gonna move to field services then.
Just so I don't ask it 3 more times, that unfunded and unfilled funded seats, was that the entire thing or just for general services?
That's the entire department. Yep.
Okay. Field services are located on page 189. So, once again, Chief, can you just give an overview of those sections and divisions that are in there basically and what field services does?
Yes, that's primarily our patrol, which would consist of K-9, the crime reduction team, our traffic division, and uniform bureau staff, and I believe
All investigations too.
okay, uniform bureau staff for patrol, and then our investigation bureau, which would consist of criminal investigation division, special investigation division. We have some technical operations. We have a technical operations department under the special investigation division. Then our community policing folks, which our school information resource officers fall under that, our DARE officers fall under that, under community relations, and our recruitment section. I think I covered everyone.
Yep, thank you. My first question is, I've never liked the indicator of the police response for service, and I know that you brought some additional literature here for people, for the counselors and for the public. See that in actuality, it's not that the Syracuse police responds to 100 and 40,000 or 160,000 calls, it makes it sound like that's it, one officer, one call, and that's not the fact. Can you give a little explanation and then maybe go over some of the highlight areas of the calls that the officers respond to?
Sure. In all of the highlighted areas that you see, the initial response calls for 2 or more officers to respond to all of these calls. And as you can see by the, let's take the alarm call. That's 8,000 calls. So you have to multiply that by 2 officers per call. And then when you have a shooting, a shots fired with injuries, that requires multiple cars that will respond to conduct an investigation, secure the crime scene, and that's with Patrol Criminal Investigation Division. And then if unfortunately the call becomes a homicide, then not only would it require the same amount of folks, but those folks will be some of them will be extended beyond a 24-hour period to secure the crime scene. And then after that, our crime scene folks will come in to process the scene. So you're talking about multiple officers for an extended period of time, and that's just for the initial investigation. What is often overlooked is the follow-through that our Criminal Investigation Division does, and absent from this sheet as well is the work that our folks from our Special Investigation do. You have where they conduct numerous search warrants each year, and also street operations. The proactive stuff is not on here as well. So that's an explanation of how some of our services are used.
Thank you. The one question on page 189 that I have before we proceed is relative to the miles logged, patrol miles logged. It jumps pretty dramatically, and just if you can either give us an explanation for why that is, or
yeah, that's yeah. There's a 1 missing from the initial. That's
okay.
A typo. The first one is a.
Then it makes sense.
2016, 2017 is a typo.
Okay, that makes sense then. Thank you.
What is the typo?
Should be 1 million.
Should be 1 million.
Instead of 2, is what you're saying?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I got you. Yeah.
So it should reflect 1,739,741 versus
Yes.
739. So for those that are in the audience.
And then, could I follow up with that with the total miles logged going from 159 to 298 from 2016-17 to 2000?
Same thing, if you make that 1 million.
Total miles entire department in 2016-17 is 1,594,000, and then in 2017, 298. Why such a dramatic jump there? That's almost double.
Yeah, the same issue. If you were to add that million and to
so
to
the
the
Excel
first
sheet
line,
is spread out.
yeah,
So the
yeah, the
next
typo
million. Okay,
the typo
sorry.
extends unfortunately straight
to the entire team.
Yeah,
Okay,
to the next
sorry.
line.
Okay, I understand now.
Yeah.
Questions on the indicators before we move to the finals, counselors?
Well, I just wanna ask about, Chief, the Special Patrol Officer part-time, what is that?
Those are police officers that we have when that are monitored, that monitor our cameras periodically.
Okay, and then one more question and I'm done. Cold cases, how many officers are working cold cases? Is it, cause I see it on here, I think it was 4 or 5, is that the correct number?
We're down to 2 now. Two detectives and a supervisor.
And so we're gonna be going up by 10, okay.
How many are you supposed to have?
How many are we supposed to have?
Yeah, ideally.
Well, ideally, we should have 6.
Counselor Bay?
Thanks. All right, so go with me for a second, Chief. I get my question right. So for use of marked and unmarked cars, and I'm suspecting here, but you can tell me if I'm wrong or not. Multiple officers may use a unmarked or marked car over a given day or week. And so my question, initial question is there a cost difference in terms of maintenance between multiple officers using a single vehicle as opposed to vehicles assigned to a single officer? Would you expect that the maintenance would maybe less officers using a car to be cheaper, or would a car be more maintained if, for example, let's take a car that Deputy Chief Schaaf may have in comparison to a car that's used by multiple officers. I would expect that one would have less maintenance. And so what I'm asking about is what is there a identified cost difference between that kind of scenario of just using two cars as an example?
Yes, the direct answer to your question is yes. We did a study in the past to show that a single use vehicle does have tendency to last longer, and the officers are more inclined to take care of it. It enables management to then enforce rules associated with the proper maintenance of a vehicle. So yes, it will, and then that would transfer into a savings in terms of the maintenance, the overall maintenance of the vehicle, and the expected life of a vehicle. I don't know if any of you have ever gone on a ride along, but in an urban environment, the way that the police officers navigate those vehicles from time to time, it puts a pretty big strain on, a pretty big toll on those vehicles.
Especially when you're in pilots. Right.
And just to piggyback on that, Chief, I should ask for a printout. What's the total amount of vehicles that we have in the police department?
Yeah, right. It's at this point that I'm missing Sergeant Sackett, because he would be screaming that number from the galleries. I don't have that number in front of me, but I could certainly.
So it's safe to say, just hypothetically, that there's not a car for every officer or a car for every two officers.
Oh, that's very safe to say. Not for every officer, but yeah, that's very safe to say.
Do we have the list of take-home cars?
Councilor Bay has one more question.
Yeah, because the ultimate thing that I was attempting to determine, maybe you guys, if you haven't already, could look to determine. Obviously, it can be done for this budget, or at least I'm assuming it can't be, but maybe for future consideration, can a comparison of sorts be provided where we could determine the feasibility of cars that are singularly assigned, to one or two persons versus, certainly we know there's a purchase for more cars, but if we can demonstrate in some way that the overall cost savings is greater with the cars that are assigned, then it's obviously something we would need to consider.
And we could certainly do that for you, and because we have vehicles right now that we could do a comparison to. For example, our K-9 officers, they take their marked patrol vehicles home because they have the dog in them, and we could compare a K-9 vehicle to a patrol vehicle that's used during the same shift, same amount of hours, and do a direct comparison between those vehicles.
Well, this is actually my second question coming, and then I'm
no, you're good.
You guys obviously again could tell us if it's practical, or tell me if it's practical or not. Just something I think about, and I'm talking about officers who live in the city. Take home marked cars. how impractical is that? And here's my logic. One, obviously they have immediate access to a car if ever needed, but two, you know, as a person who's had a police car parked in his driveway before, it's very relaxing for the people on the street. You know, and just to have, you know, you talking about deterrent crime, it's better than a camera, you know, if there's a car sitting on the block. But just wondering how practical or impractical is that? Does it create the potential for greater liability if it's parked on the street or in a driveway?
I don't know about potential for liability, because I mean, where would the liability come from? If the vehicle, I mean, if the vehicle's in the driveway, that's one thing. But if the vehicle's parked on the street, then certainly,
That's what I'm talking
while
about.
the officers sleep, you can be concerned about someone damaging the vehicle or something like that. And I don't know if you're referring to that when you.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
I don't know. I don't know. Because if it's something that you tend to get used to, then there's a least likelihood that some damage will be caused to the vehicle. But if it's something that you're starting out for the first time, there's going to be some growing pains for sure.
Right. It's just another thing that I thought about that I think, you know, probably could be considered. It seems to have two values there. One, again, immediate access, but two, it acts as a bit of a deterrent. At least from my perspective, in my experience. So that's all I got.
Thank you. Other counselors?
Chief, obviously you've worked on it, hear it every year. Take-home cars. You've gotten the list down a couple times. Do you know what the numbers are right now?
Yep, they're the same as they were last year.
It's like 44 or something?
Excuse me?
It's like 44 or something?
No, we had gotten down to 40.
40?
And that was through attrition. Yeah. And as our numbers increase, that may bump up just a little bit because of the
Percentage of cars.
positions, yeah.
And then my only other questions were so the weapons recovered at the middle and high schools. That stuff, you know, do we have a breakdown of that? And then also under crime reduction team, recovered guns, it says 150.
Okay.
We had 142 in 2016. Do we know how many arrests and convictions we got out of those 150?
What's the next one, though? It's the 36.
Yeah, okay, go with your first question again, and could you pause
So
there and then ask me your second question next?
Middle and high schools, weapons recovered. Do we have a breakdown of what those weapons are?
We do not.
Okay.
But I could just tell you, in general, you're likely talking about bladed instruments.
Not a lot of guns.
No, thank God, no.
That's good. And then for the under crime reduction, page 192, recovered guns, 142 in 2016. We're looking at 150. Do we know how many arrests and/or convictions we got for those?
All right, so arrests, that information we can absolutely get to you.
Okay.
No, we don't have that today. In terms of convictions,
Could be years from now.
yes.
Sorry, just to sort of go back to a conversation we were just having about, in reference to take-home cars and the officers in the city being more likely to, where are we at numbers-wise with actual officers that are city residents? I mean, how feasible would that be, and what would the effect really be? Like, how many officers currently on the force are actually city residents? Is that something that you guys have on hand?
I don't have an exact number, but I know that the number of officers on the force that are city residents is extremely low.
Yeah, I think last year we were maybe around like in the 30s. I think, yeah.
All right, well, we'll take that number. Right.
But yeah, I don't know if that's
I
something.
guess the question would be then, do you have 30 cars that you could give up to have people take home?
No, but the bigger question would be, do I have 30 cops that want to drive those cars home? That's the bigger question. And that answer would likely be no as well.
Even if we get them really nice cars with a big placard on the side of it, as an incentive maybe to move back into the city.
I think that would work against you, quite frankly.
Any other counselors' questions? Counselor Green? He's good. I got it.
My question's on page 195, the numbers there. So I'm looking at the line that says contractual obligations for 275,000. I'm just curious what that is.
You said 275?
Yeah, the contractual obligations column.
Yeah.
511,200.
Yeah.
That is that's the sick incentive, that's the $1,200.
Licensing of software and all that.
That's the sick incentive. That's for the officers get paid $1,200.
So that's a different column.
Yeah,
There's a different line for that right underneath it, right? The sick time buyback. So I'm looking at the one right above that.
There's a difference between sick incentive and sick time buyback.
Okay.
All right, so the sick incentive is an incentive for the officers who do not use their sick time.
Okay.
They get $300 per quarter for a total of $1,200 a year as an incentive for not using their sick time. And then the sick time buyback is the amount that they can that the city would buy back when the person retires.
Okay. So if I don't use my sick time, I get paid the $300 for not using it. Then I can also sell that back as well.
That's correct.
Up to 250.
Okay. So this is just a projection based on what you would think the attendance will be this year, essentially.
Yes. We project out the amount of folks that we would anticipate retiring at the end of this fiscal year, because ideally you want to have the money to pay these out because they're contractual payments.
So then the next question is second from the bottom there. So it's the reimbursement from other funds. So what does that entail?
Sure, that's payment from the outside services. For example, use Parkside Commons, for example. They reimburse us, city school district reimburse us for the officers that they have, that they have working there.
Okay, thanks.
Counselor Rudd.
Thank you. A couple months ago, I was fortunate enough to be able to go on a ride-along, which I very much appreciate the opportunity. And on that day, I think there were about 26 officers who were working in the shift. Is that a typical number for an 8-hour shift?
That's not something we're going to talk about at this table in a forum like this. That's
okay. What about the fraction of officers on a typical shift who are being paid on overtime? So like if like my 26 number, how many of those shifts are typically being filled on overtime?
It depends. We have a minimum staffing number, and if you are interested in what that minimum staffing number is offline, we will be happy to provide that to you. But
okay.
That's our minimum staffing number is an indication to the commander of what it is that they're allowed to hire for that shift. And if the officers that are assigned to work there it falls below that number, then the commander has an opportunity to hire to reach that minimum staffing number at a rate of time and a half.
So when we bring in a new class, would that change that number that's typically out there at all, or would it change the composition that's on overtime? Like, would it decrease the overtime, or would it increase the number who are out there?
Okay, so I understand your question, and I would love to give you a direct answer to your question, but I don't have a direct answer to your question because we're in the process of hiring right now. We have 403 officers, and we're projecting, even out of that 403 officers, that we're going to lose 5 additional officers before within the next quarter, right? And now we have the rest of the year. Those officers won't get sworn in until July. They won't actually. We won't, once they get sworn in July, they won't really provide a service to the city until about 6.5 months later is when we can actually assign them to their permanent assignment. So we're talking from the point that we're having this conversation right now to almost a year later before these officers will actually be out there in a part of our system. We're going to continue to lose people, and so at the time that these officers graduate, we're going to be almost right back at the same number, if not lower. So hopefully we'll have a chance to hire again right after that. In order for us to get our staffing levels back up to a decent number where we won't have to look at overtime for minimum staffing, we're going to have to hire certainly more than one class.
And then, additionally, last week I was able to go to the Civilian Police Academy, and I recommended it to other counselors, and I thought it was really informative and gave me insight into the pressures of the job and the nature of the work and the way the laws work, and I very much appreciated that. And it emphasizes to me the importance of having officers who are fresh. And when you look at when Syracuse.com publishes the annual thing of salaries to total take-home pay, there's a lot of overtime. So in an environment where people are, what are your strategies for keeping officers fresh in the current environment?
My strategy for keeping officers fresh is to show up at a table like this, a meeting like this, and hope that someone like you asks me a question like that, and I'll say, hire more officers. That's my strategy. How's it working?
Can you put your request in the context of other cities of similar size with the number of officers per people with like similar compositions? Would that also indicate that we should hire more officers?
That would indicate that we would hire more officers if we use the right variables, right? So if you're going to compare a city to our size, population-wise, right, and you say, okay, this city has a certain amount of officers, and officers in the Syracuse Police Department has more officers than that. So why is it that the Syracuse Police Department would need to hire more officers in order for them to answer the calls? So you have to look at costs for services. That's one variable that you have to look at. But another variable that's often overlooked, but it's extremely important when processing something like this, is man hours. Our police officers work 35 hours? What's
32.
32, yeah, 32 hours.
4 and 2, right?
Yeah,
4 days on, 2 days off.
4 days on, 2 days off, which is a 32-hour work week. And when you have to compare those numbers to what the officers are working in other cities as well, which you're going to discover that they're working more than 32 hours a week. So when you go man hour per man hour, then I would say that would be an indication, that would show an indication that we absolutely need to hire.
We get 7 minutes,
Okay.
and I got a couple less questions for them, so go ahead.
To go along with that, I know right now, we reduced the OT in the last budget. Now we're doing a mid-year transfer to try and make sure that, we can actually have officers out on patrol. With the proposed budget and what we're looking to do, I know it's less than what's projected for this year, for 19. However, the salaries are increased. Do you believe that, that'll get us where we need to be and there won't have to be any sort of mid-year transfer? Or is this something that this is hopefully where we're going to be at, and that we're going to, have you guys come back to the table and end up having to, put more money into the account? Or do you feel comfortable with where we're going to be in this budget?
Well, that's the number that we're coming in with, and we're going to do our best to reach that number, sir.
Okay. Okay, and then just real quick, I know we've talked about this in the past, and I've brought it up to the administration, and had conversations ongoing. I don't know if you guys have looked into it any further. Similar to like what Buffalo does, where the city themselves does their own civil service exam. Have we looked into what we believe that would ultimately cost us and the value? Like, would it be too expensive for us to do to actually get the benefit out of it?
Oh, I don't. There's a process. Yeah. And so the direct answer to your question is I don't believe it would be too expensive.
Okay.
The way that the city of Buffalo does it, and the reason why they have the ability to do it, is that they have their own what is it called,
Civil service.
yeah, they have the ability to have their own civil service exam.
Yeah, they went to the state and were able to put that
Yes.
in legislation, have a home rule. And I would just be curious, since there already is a model for us to follow, I would assume that we could probably go to the state unless something has changed and get something like that done. I'd just be curious to figure out if you guys have looked into what it would cost. And, ultimately we can probably figure out if there would either be, I don't want to just say savings, but if it would be beneficial, because again, we've had this conversation. You guys go out, you recruit, you get city residents, you get, women, minorities, what we're looking for, and usually a lot of different departments tend to pick off that list and get, the folks that maybe we've recruited in the city. So I would just be curious to know if we have an idea of what that number would be, of what it would cost for us ultimately to put that together.
I don't think the cost would be that great, because what you would have to do is just make an adjustment in a personnel or human resource, whether it's our human resource or the city of Syracuse personnel, and make the changes there. And if you already have the personnel there, or that could accommodate the new change, then there's your answer. And if you have to hire one more person to accommodate the new change, then there's your answer. But it would absolutely be worth it for the process.
And do you believe, in your opinion, that it would, administration and council willing, that it would make the process of hiring officers, much quicker, and we'd be able to see some of those officers going through the academy and on out patrolling, much quicker?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because the process would be streamlined. The process would be specific to the city of Syracuse. Right now, the Syracuse Police Department, if we go to hire, we're competing with every other police agency in Onondaga County. And as you've already put it, we're the only ones in Onondaga County to recruit, and we recruit based on what our needs are and what our desires are in terms of diversity and overall demographics of the police department. And once we recruit and the person takes the exam, they're there for the taking. For it's first come, first serve, and that's how the process is. And so we do all the work and others reap the benefits for it. But if we had our own civil service exam and we had our own list, then it would absolutely be beneficial to us, and that would also give us the ability to add to that list a little bit more often, because we could offer the exam as frequently as that we wanted to.
Chief, in conclusion, is there anything that you would like to say, and if not, or can you also include in there how many officers you're authorized to hire at this next state? And we're all of support. As you know, we were in support last year of getting the officers hired. Last year we weren't successful in that. They did keep the money in the budget, but now we're hoping to get it spent. This mayor has said that he would move forward with an initial class, and he's hoping to be able to put a class on in the fall too, I know, so if all works out.
Yeah, certainly. That's not just a hope. The mayor instructed me a few weeks ago to move full speed ahead, and we have. We're in the probably the third week. We're in the third week of the hiring process, where we're conducting our background investigations, and currently we have 152 people that are still a part of our process, and we'll get a solid number for consideration at the end of this process, and those folks will look to swear them in at some point in July.
Okay. Any other Anything you'd like to say? This may be your last one.
This
It
is
may
my-
not. It may
This
not.
is my last one, brother.
It may not.
Listen, if
You
there's
know?
one thing that hasn't been clear at this table, this is my last time coming here, so
So
everybody
so
check
can you
that
might
box.
want to bring in a little you got it like they say on the radio. You've got 2 minutes to sum up what you might like to see occur here in the police department as you transition out.
Yeah, well, all right, so I'll capitalize on this opportunity to say that I know that we are looking for, wow, we're on TV, right, or YouTube or something. This is great opportunity. I know that we're looking, there's gonna be a national search for a police chief. And I've served beside this guy right here for the entire time that I've been a chief of police. And you're not going to find a brighter person. You're not going to find a more dedicated person. You're talking about a Corcoran High School graduate, a person that spent their entire police career here and in the city of Syracuse, serving the great city of Syracuse, a competent person, a person that has a very solid background in community policing. And we would do ourselves a grave disservice if we didn't give First Deputy Chief Joe Cecil a very strong look to replace me as the Chief of Police. And I'm a citizen of the city of Syracuse, and I know that that part of the process is polling the citizens of the city of Syracuse. So as the Chief of Police, you have my shameless plug. And as a citizen of the city of Syracuse, I'm going to go for this guy too. So there you go, 2 shots at it. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and honor. All right.
Thank you, Chief.
Before you leave, can you give me the number of storefronts that we still have?
Sure. Yeah, if you like.
We still have the same number of storefronts. We haven't lost any as we had last year and the year before. We have one on East Tennessee Street that's currently not staffed due to a shortage of staffing. I'm looking to try some creative ways of getting the storefronts utilized by the whole entire patrol division and police department versus just the community policing division. I'm working on a pilot project in Eastwood right now to see about with these key fobs, if we can get a storefront set up there, and then every police officer in the city can get in with a key fob, then it'll be utilized. There'll be police officers in and out of it, and I'd like to try a pilot program up there this year. I'm already working with Steve Skinner, who owns the property up there, to get that established. So, but we have the same number of storefronts currently.
And they're strategically distributed in an equal manner.
We have the one in the Valley, west side downtown. We have Southwest Community Center, Officer Hendricks in there. And then the east side, we have West Guy Street, East Tennessee Street. North side, Butternut Street has 2. And the west side has over on Marcellus and the Martisco building.
Thank you, Chief. And that concludes the budget meeting for the police. We have the CRB coming right up, so you can hold your seat, or if you got to run out for a minute, please come right back and we'll get started with the CRB.
I'm a city